Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Hoss Talks Foss. I'm Matt Yonkovit, the Hoss here at Percona, and I'm here with Kyle Davis. Kyle, how are you doing today?
I am great. Thanks for asking.
Great. So if you don't know, Kyle works for AWS, and his project, his baby, is the OpenSearch project, which is the fork of Elastic that just recently came out and recently went GA. So we're glad to have Kyle on here. If you hadn't seen, Kyle also did probably the longest marathon session at Percona Live that we had. I think he had, 6 sessions in a row just on OpenSearch. A big deep dive there, which is awesome. But Kyle, thank you for joining us. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your background because I've talked to a lot of different people over the last, few months, and I don't always talk to someone in a dev advocacy role. And this is something that is a very popular position that I'm starting to see crop up in lots of different organizations. And so wanted to, maybe have you talk a little bit about your background, give us, your journey to how you became a dev advocate at, AWS and what that means.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. And the dev advocacy is something I'm pretty passionate about. I'm one of those people that I should have been probably riding my bike when I was a kid, and instead I was writing software. And I have a big passion for that. And I also have before I was in developer advocacy and before I was, I had a career diversion into higher education. So I worked at universities for about a decade. So for me, it's all about, making sure that I can talk and share all sorts of information about developers and developer activities with people who are trying to learn a new set of software, or they're trying to get involved with it in some way or another. So my background previously before this, I was full stack developer, and I was ran my own company for a while. And then I started using this software called Redis, and I worked for Redis Labs for a long while in their the developer advocacy division as well. And so for me, I'm a database guy. That's where I find a lot of my passion, and a lot of where I find frankly the neatest stuff to work with is in databases. And so I like to be able to share my passion with other folks on this. So for the OpenSearch project, I was actually hired for OpenDistro for Elasticsearch, which is kind of the predecessor to OpenSearch. And kind of took this role because I wanted to work more with open source. I've worked with open source kind of projects throughout my career, but I really wanted the experience of working with a really interesting thing and trying to get contributors and that sort of thing. So in my role as a developer advocate, I have kind of a split responsibility. One, it's to make sure people who are interested in OpenSearch get what they need. Like, how do they get the resources they need? Is the product delivering what they need? And so I kind of work as that bridge between the developers who are using it and those who are wanting and developing it. And then also my other responsibility is about contributors and getting people to contribute to the software as well. So getting people the resources that they might need to get started.
So yeah, it's that dual path. So it's, you've got the feedback loop that you're trying to get. I got to be honest, every open source project I've ever worked on, or any product, whether it's open source or not, there's always that feedback. It's like, I want more feedback. I can't, get the feedback I need from the users. And it seems like that is a missing component from a lot of software companies, a lot of products, because you want to make sure that you're developing a product for the users that are going to use it. And a lot of times you end up having 2 or 3 very vocal users who end up driving most of the roadmap, which isn't good either.
No.
So it's building out those relationships so you can listen and hear. And it's interesting because I've seen kind of this dev advocate evangelist role in many different companies take on different forms. And, you mentioned 2 of the big ones, which is feedback and contributions, which, those are two big ones. But a lot of companies don't necessarily even want contributions. So this ends up being a lot of evangelism as well, where you're out there at Percona Live, for instance, and you're telling people how to use it, how to install it. So you've kind of got these 3 prongs, which is the feedback, you've got the contributions, and you've got that evangelism that look at all of the cool things you can do. Let me show you. Let me teach you. And that sounds like it's kind of your background, having come from university, having that passion to teach people how to do something, more interesting.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
And people who are trying to get into a dev advocate role or a role, what advice would you have for them?
Gosh, right now it's great. This is I'm part of a DevRel Slack called the DevRel Collective, and when I joined, there was probably like 500 people, which was a few years ago. Now there's over 2,000 people in this. Yeah, really active community, and there are, as you indicated, there's lots of organizations that are hiring, for more developer advocates. So if you're interested in this, basically, the kind of ingredients to be a developer advocate is you need to know your stuff, right? You need to be able to learn quickly, because you may get a job and that is not something that you're fully familiar with, right? So maybe you're relatively new to it, so you have to dive in and be able to get there. And then you need to be open to talking to people. It's really a people person type of role that has technology as its kind of background, right? It's thinking about communication and communication with developers and being empathetic to what they need are key components to being a developer advocate.
Now, it's interesting. Developer advocate is very focused. It sounds like it's all developer focused. And in a lot of cases, it ends up transforming into, more than just developer, because you've got, your infrastructure people, you've got your DBAs, you've got your sysadmins, you've got your DevOps engineers. You've got all of these different, players in the space. And I think that a lot of companies are looking at how do we reach those developers. But a lot of what we do ends up reaching not only developers, but it reaches those infrastructure folks as well.
That's a great point. The interesting thing is that there's not a good term that encompasses everybody. I've seen organizations jump through hoops trying to say, technical evangelism or something along those lines to be encompassing of people who operate software, people who are DBAs, people who are, name these things. And so as a field, developer advocates generally just use the word developer to mean not only people who write software, which is that's the probably best definition of what a developer is, but also people who run the software and people who, enable others to run the software, set up the infrastructure. So it's kind of a catch-all for sure. With OpenSearch, for example, for sure we have people who are writing Python or Java or whatever every day, but we have a lot of folks that are more on the infrastructure side, and they're monitoring and doing log analytics and trying to make sure that their services are staying up. So we have to make sure that we're addressing everybody who would be using the software, and so often this software addresses more than one kind of group of people. So it's a challenge, and I think part of that is this is not a good word for it.
Yeah, well, and this is where I come from the database space as well, as you know. Like, I've been in the database space now for 20 plus years, and I'll be honest, my experience, and this is me talking, is developers don't like databases. Right? Like, it's like the necessary evil for their application, which is great because, a lot of the new technologies that are coming out, whether it's database as a service or whatever, it enables developers to move quickly, click the button, it's up, running, boom, boom. But that shifts a lot of the focus for people who are trying to do that evangelism and trying to get people excited or, show them what they can do. Because a lot of the features, sometimes they're features that are like, yeah, they're totally needed. Security's totally needed. But the mindset of a developer doesn't always think about those, security or stability or scalability issues. They're thinking, features. So, I mean, and this is me picking your brain here. How do you reach developers who might not necessarily care as much about the database internals or the functionality? That's a challenge that I've seen many companies across the space run into.
Oh yeah, it's a challenge for sure. The one thing I think is interesting about it is when you get down to the basics of it, right? In my mind, databases and programming languages are really kind of two sides of the same coin. And so when you start exposing developers to that, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you look at SQL, right, like it derives from Ada. Like it has the same roots as Ada, right? And I learned Ada early in my career, which is a bizarre language to learn. And when I figured that out, I was like, oh my gosh, the world opened up to me. So I've tried to bring that along for a lot of folks, is to show people, a database is just a really specialized, domain-specific language that will allow you to do really powerful things that you didn't think were possible, right? So often it's people will work around and do everything possible to avoid using some sort of feature in a database. And when you expose them to some of the features that you can use, it's like, everything that I've done so far has been too much, and I can just use this one little feature that will really make things a lot easier on myself. But it's also a challenge too, because there are DBAs out there, for example, love DBAs, but there are DBAs out there that want people to stay 1 meter away from their database, right, for stability or lots of other reasons too.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. Like you talk about, like, sometimes people avoid using features because they want to prevent lock-in or whatever reason. They're like, oh, I'm not going to use this database feature. I had a company that I worked for 10 years ago when I was doing consulting, and they actually didn't want to use database joins in case they wanted to change the back end. So they would basically read two tables and then join it in Java.
Yep. I've 100% seen that.
Why would you do that? It's weird stuff like that still happens. But thanks for telling us a little bit about the DevRel background. And now coming in to AWS, you mentioned you've been there for a bit of time now, and you started with coming in. Hey, you're going to work on getting code contributions on the Open distro. And then things kind of changed, right? So it changed to this fork called OpenSearch. So right. For those listening who might not have seen your sessions, might not have seen that, maybe just give us a high level on what OpenSearch is.
Yeah. I think this is important to understand the context. So in the beginning, there was Elasticsearch, right, and Kibana, and there was multiple different ways you could get that, right? There was an open source version, and then there was a version that had some proprietary code that you couldn't use if you, for example, had an organizational prohibition from using certain licenses, right? It might have been free, there might have been some that was paid for, so on and so forth. And that worked fine for a lot of folks. Basically, AWS said, our users are asking for a lot more, so what's the best way to solve that? Elasticsearch and Kibana both are pluggable architectures, so they built a series of plugins. AWS built a series of plugins and released them as open source, and then packaged this all together with an installer and a couple other tools and called it Open Distro for Elasticsearch, somewhat similar to a Linux distribution. And that happened in 2019, right? And that provided a lot of function for people because it was pure open source, right? It was Apache 2 up and down the stack. And you had the features that you needed. And some of these features were just table stakes, like security, like being able to make sure someone had to provide a password to get into Elasticsearch. And we all know that when you have a database that doesn't have a password, you're just asking for trouble, no matter how much you try to secure it.
Oh, really?
I've never heard of a problem occurring because of someone not putting it. Yeah. So that existed for a while, and I think that we had a lot of adoption for that across a variety of industries, but a lot of people adopted it because they wanted to not have lock-in, or they wanted to have the same. That's what AWS's Amazon Elasticsearch service ran on, right? So they wanted to have the same type of functionality either on-prem or in the service that they were using.
Allows that portability between the cloud and on-prem. Yeah, for
sure, and that's totally reasonable. And so that existed for a while, and then in January of 2021, we were in a meeting, and one of the developer managers on Open Distro said, "Hey, there was a blog post posted this morning, and it said that there's going to be a license change on Elasticsearch." And my thought was, okay, it's been a good few months here. I need to go find a new job. I thought it was all over, right? And come to find out, Elastic changed the license to a proprietary license, SSPL, or the Elastic license. And that meant that Open Distro was not something that was possible to be developed anymore. There was no base for that. So after Elasticsearch 7.10.2, the license was changed to this dual license between the Elastic license and SSPL, which both are not open source licenses. They're proprietary licenses. They may be defined as source available, but they're not open source by the open source definition.
Right.
And so after a lot of deliberation, the decision was made at AWS to say, we're going to stick a bunch of engineers at this and let's create a purely open source fork of Elasticsearch and Kibana, which involved us renaming. And because it is a fork, we needed to rename, as well as the code base for Elasticsearch and Kibana was a little bit unusually done because it was mixed, right? So some files were proprietary and some files were open source. And so there was a lot of meticulous separation of that, right? So basically we had to strip out all of that. We had to strip out, have new build processes. We had to strip out anything that was like marketing stuff that was being put into it, any type of phone home or a telemetry collection that was being used, that had to be all stripped out. And then we took the plugins and tools that were part of the Open Distro project and combined that with these new forks of Elasticsearch and Kibana. And Elasticsearch became OpenSearch, and Kibana became OpenSearch dashboards. And so combining those together with the plugins, you have this new kind of stack out here that has, all the great features that you would expect. Some are quite premium features that other organizations charge money for. Now you have it all as an open source Apache 2.0 stack that you can use pretty much anywhere. Apache 2.0 is really permissive and used a lot of places.
And I've noticed that there's actually quite a few companies that have started to contribute as well and work with you. So it's not just an AWS project, it's a community-driven project. So I think I saw Ivan was one. LogZ was doing some work as well. So, and there are other bigger companies out there that are starting to, become part of this community and this collective. How has that growth been going?
Yeah, so, being community-driven is really important. And community-driven is one of those it's a little bit of it can mean a lot of different things to many different people, right? And from our perspective, we want to build what people want, right? And as part of that, we want people to contribute, right? So we've been really aggressively looking at other folks to help us along the way. When I say us, I'm saying AWS in this case. And then collectively, we can be the OpenSearch project. So you're right. LogZ has been an active contributor. We have a lot of kind of drive-by contributions. We have a lot of people from the Lucene project, which is Lucene is one of the things that OpenSearch and Elasticsearch are based on, right? Have come in and dive in and helped us really build some great software. So we have a partners program for those people who are wanting to kind of create a closer relationship. But in reality, everything occurs in the open, right? If you want to be part of the partners program, it's a pull request, right? So we really feel like this is all part of this, and we're working on is being as transparent as possible, right? As we go along, we're bringing in more people into the fold, and that's going to be taking the form of different people in different organizations being able to have complete control over parts of the project, right? So it'll be something that we see as not just an AWS thing, but really see as if you have the desire, the drive, and the engineering to contribute to it, we want to empower you to do that, right? So there are some complications. OpenSearch is a very complex project, and the release is not simple. But I think there's some architectural changes that are eventually coming down the pike that will make this an easier project for multiple stakeholders to have a true ownership in.
Yeah, and honestly, just from what Elastic was, a fork process, it's of a software this large is a daunting task. I mean, that's a very big undertaking. It's not something that you can undertake lightly generally. What were some of the challenges in forking such a large project? Like, what did you run into that was, we needed to overcome this, we needed to overcome that, what were some of those things? Because it's kind of a last resort generally in most companies to fork something. You want to contribute upstream, obviously, when they change the licensing, you can. But maybe talk to us a little bit about that process of some of the gotchas and the big fork and things you had to overcome.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's super challenging. And that's been a constant discussion. Is like, can we contribute this upstream somewhere, or is it something that we need to fork? Because it should be the last ditch effort to fork something. And this is a case where, yeah, it should be. I think for a lot of folks, if you have kind of a cursory use of open source projects, you just go to GitHub and you hit the fork button and you got a fork. But that's not the reality when you work with something that has so many components and it's such a large code base that has 10 years of development involved in it. So, as far as what we had to go through, right, like one of that was the separating out of the different licenses. That's done, and we never want to do that again. Incredibly painful.
Yes.
It was a lot of work. We had two different projects, right? We have Kibana that we turned into OpenSearch dashboards, and then Elasticsearch we turned into OpenSearch. And they took two different teams doing this because they're different programming languages. And one team said we're going to look at every single file that was OpenSearch, and then OpenSearch dashboard said we're going to like copy, replace, and clean up the mess, right, across the whole thing. I can't say either one was really good. There was, it was hard either way. So we did keep on finding little bits and pieces here and there. Right before we released our release candidate, we were going through and we saw for 1/2 of 1 second a logo come up that was not a logo for OpenSearch, and we had to delay our release. Right, like that was something that we looked at and we said that's not acceptable for it to go forward. And come to find out that logo was embedded in a dependency, so it wasn't even something in the code, right? So we had to go and figure out why that was. But literally for 480 milliseconds, it was on the screen. And we had one eagle-eyed developer who was kind of QAing it and said, "Wait a minute, I just saw something." And so just stuff like that. I mean, that's an eye blink, right? And then we'll find things like URLs that are embedded that follow a format that does OpenSearch doesn't have, and we'll find these different pieces here and there. We're going to find these little pieces everywhere, but we're very confident that all this kind of proprietary stuff is gone. And so if you wanted to fork, if Matt, you said I want to fork OpenSearch, you could, and it wouldn't be something that you would have to do that kind of same painful process. And that's important because it keeps everyone honest.
Yeah, because I think that's the beauty of open source, right? Is you have the opportunity to take the software and do what you need to, and if whoever the maintainer isn't keeping up with what you feel, you have the opportunity to take it and try something else, and that's a powerful thing in the open source space, and it's something that I think a lot of us have valued the ability to do that because you can not only contribute, but if your contributions don't make it in, you always have that opportunity to make your own version, build your own libraries, things like that. I mean, and this has been classic in the MySQL space and the Postgres space for years, because a lot of times what you'll see is a company will come along and they'll say, hey, I want this special feature, this special, I'm going to hook into my security infrastructure, my monitoring infrastructure, and then it just doesn't make it upstream. And so they maintain a fork and, they have their own internal thing.
Yep.
And many companies have done that over the years. Cool. So you've gone through the work now, and you just recently GA'd. So congratulations on that. So now it is officially GA and ready for prime time. It's out there. And the OpenSearch, is this now what's running behind the scenes as well, like the full stack for the service for AWS?
Not quite. So that's something that we're going to be working on. Right now I'm on calls every day about that. So what will eventually happen is, right now the service is Amazon Elasticsearch service. We're changing that into Amazon OpenSearch service, and we'll have some sort of, formerly known as Amazon Elasticsearch service, so people can identify it. Then that'll be the prime the first thing you're offered as far as that. But if you are an existing user, or you want to use some old version, we do maintain old versions, so it's not like you'll be forced to use OpenSearch, right? So you can still select open distro based ones. I think 19 versions back. It's we keep everything alive. So if you want to stick with it, go for it. My job is not really so much working with the service, so I can answer just the kind of brief questions about it. But the one thing I do want to say is, the thing we really want to kind of tighten up on this is we want Amazon OpenSearch service to be a kind of model version of OpenSearch, and we want to make sure that if there's a open source release as soon as possible. Right now we're in a period of weeks before it'll be out on the service. We want that to be tightened up as much as possible. So if we release OpenSearch 2.4 in the future, what we'd love, I don't know if we're ever going to get there or not, is within hours you'll be able to get on the service. Our release process
that's great.
Would be that way.
And right? I think that allows people to run the mixed use cases, and I think that's a great outcome. Now, can I mention one thing here?
I do want to say something about that, though. If you want to use OpenSearch right now, there are services that provide OpenSearch and do it. Bonsai Search, for example, is offering it to their customers right now. So they, and I think one day, we're able to get OpenSearch GA up on their service.
Wow, okay.
So, they beat us to it, which is great.
Yeah, no, and that's what you want to see. Is you want to see that collaboration and work together, and as these projects become more successful, the more people who can benefit from them, the better off the ecosystem is, right? It's about making the pie bigger for everyone, and then everyone is going to share in it. So I do think that's a excellent thing that you actually had someone else beat you to a service for OpenSearch. So that's cool.
We're proud of that.
So if people are looking to get started, and maybe number one, start using, and number two, maybe contribute. Yeah. What does that look like right now?
Sure. So the way you can get started, the easiest way, go to OpenSearch.org. In the top right-hand corner, there is a button that says Get Started. And the first thing there is the Docker Compose that will launch a cluster and OpenSearch dashboards. So if you want to play around with it, within a few minutes, you're up and running. With just, you download a YAML file and run Docker Compose up. You have a coffee because you have to download lots of dependencies. That's just the way Docker works. And, you'll be able to get in there, and then you can start by clicking, you go to dashboards. There's on the front page of it, try some sample data, and you can start querying. It'll load some sample data in. You can start getting your hands dirty with visualizations. Super easy.
Great. And if they're looking to contribute, maybe participate in some of the discussions around features and roadmaps, where can they do that?
Sure. So a couple different ways to do that. Like I said, we do everything on GitHub, right? So you can look at our roadmap. You can kind of dive into OpenSearch project is our GitHub ID, and also available on OpenSearch.org if you want to just kind of follow those links. Basically, there's lots of help and wanted tags out there. Just dive right in. The nice thing about the project is we don't use a CLA, which is a kind of barrier to entry for those who haven't used those before. You have to sign a legal document, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. But we do use what's called DCO, Developer Certificate of Origin, which is basically you sign off your commits. And it's a lighter weight, and it still provides the protection that your code is contributed in a way that makes a lot of sense. It's something the Linux Foundation uses. So you can get started really quickly. We do have community meetings that we hold bi-weekly, so if you want to join in on those, you can kind of get the lowdown on those. It'll be really easy to kind of bridge your way into it. But then, we have forums as well that you can kind of gauge if you have questions or anything like that you can do. You can see what's the most appropriate way to dive in. And we've had lots of people that have said, hey, is this a possible thing on the forums? And we say, yes, do it. And they've done it. And that's great for everyone.
That's cool. Yeah, that's good to get the instant feedback and be able to, contribute back. So that's awesome. And so what does the future hold? Like you've been having these kind of open discussions. Where does the roadmap take you in the next 6, 9, 12, 36 months? Who knows how long?
Yep.
Like what have you got planned?
So the best thing about OpenSearch, and I think it's really a credit to the people who are doing it, is we have this policy of having open roadmaps. So we have GitHub projects, basically. We keep our roadmap available, and you can get that. OpenSearch.org has links to it. It's a bit of a long URL, but you can take a look at it and scroll down and see what we're doing, and that's the roadmap we work from. So it's interesting when you look at that. So we use semantic versioning. So starting right now, 1.0 is out, late August timeframe. We're looking at 1.1, and we'll do kind of a release train schedule. So about every month, we're going to release something. And we're looking at OpenSearch 2.0 coming out in January of 2022. So with semantic versioning, 1.1 range is largely compatible with Elasticsearch 7.10.2. There's just a few little nuances and setup things that are different. But 2.0 will bring the possibility of breaking changes, but that comes with a lot of also ability to start advancing things really quickly. We already have some breaking changes planned. They'll be pretty minor. We're going to get rid of some language that's non-inclusive that will break some things. So we want to move away from just some things that are common in the industry, but maybe not be the best for the whole industry. But that will be a breaking change. It's nominal, but we're looking at that. But we'll also start looking at adding in, some more features and changing some architecture that will really make it better for everybody.
Great. Well, Kyle, thank you for hanging out with me this morning. I do appreciate it. And, I appreciate you guys being transparent and, helping out the community with all the things you've done with OpenSearch. And we look forward to seeing where the project goes.
It's going to be fun to watch.
Wow, what a great episode that was. We really appreciate you coming and checking it out. We hope that you love open source as much as we do. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, tune in to next week's episode. We really appreciate you coming and talking open source with us.